Aloha. This is about the midterm project that I have given you and some definitions that I think will help you in preparing for your project. The first thing I want to talk about are concepts. A concept is an abstract idea of something. I use the example of birds, and we can talk about a mynah bird, we can talk about a canary, we could talk about a robin or an eagle. But, and when I say bird, each of you might come up with a different bird in your mind. But the concept of bird covers all birds. The same thing with cars. And so we can talk about a lot of different cars. I happen to have a Subaru. Other people have Fords or Toyotas and Hondas. And yet they are all a car. They're a means of transportation. We also, within that, have different kinds of concepts. So when we're talking about concepts that are fairly common to everyone, or items within those concepts, we say that those are prototypical concepts. These are what we would normally think of. Again, Toyota is more common, or a Honda is more common. And people know what we're talking about, even though each of you might think about a different car. But another concept that we talk about is the atypical concept. Again, we're talking about car, but there are a lot of cars that we might not think of right away. For example, the Bugatti. It's an atypical concept. Probably not very many of you thought about that as the first one. If one of you did, I'd be surprised. There's a little aside here. And I happen to be knowledgeable in the Greek language. When you put an A at the beginning of any word, it negates that word. In other words, if we say something is typical, then we know what typical means. But if we put an A in front of it and say that it's atypical, it simply means that it's not a typical concept. And then we also talk about formal and natural concepts. So a formal concept is something that has very specific rules, like a triangle. We know that a triangle always will have three sides. They may have different lengths, but they will always have three sides. And I use tennis, but you could also think of other games, soccer, golf. There are just certain specific rules of games that need to be followed. And you can think about other formal concepts. A natural concept, then, is a concept that doesn't have those specific rules. And I think that you won't have any trouble in finding or coming up with items that come under that. I think the first thing that comes to mind is river. We certainly have no rules about a river or how it flows. Within your your midterm project, if you were in a classroom, I would talk about several ways to solve problems. And two of the primary headings would be algorithmic and heuristic. Algorithm is something that's logical, very systematic. You go step by step. Heuristic is more trial and error, definitely not systematic. For example, if I follow the recipe for a cake that I want to make, and I follow it just exactly the way it's written up, I know pretty much what I can expect at the end if I don't do anything wrong. That, I would say, is the algorithmic way of baking a cake. But if I just throw in the bowls, anything that kind of looks or smells good or sounds good, and hope that it works out, mix it all up and throw it in the oven, then I've baked my cake heuristically. I don't really know how it's going to turn out. I just hope that it tastes okay and it doesn't poison anybody. So other ways that we have of solving problems are insight. Jokes are an example of insight. And there are other ways that you learn to solve problems, But right now, we're just going to leave it with these two, the algorithmic and the heuristic. Now, I suggest that you go and work on your project. If you can get pictures off the internet, you can take pictures, you can draw pictures. But if you have any questions, feel free to text me or to email me. Not everybody remembers to let me know who you are, and I have other classes, so I need to know who you are and which class you're taking. Just check the syllabus for the date when your project is due. It is usually worth up to 40 points. People want to know, how do I turn it in? If you were in a classroom, face-to-face class, I could say you could do a poster. It probably isn't the way to do it on an online class. But you could use Microsoft Word and just cut and paste pictures in. Keynote, which is the Apple equivalent to PowerPoint, or any kind of a video, anything that you know, any way that you have of presenting your project. The main thing that I want to say is to be sure to label everything on that project so that I know that you know what you're talking about. Have fun with this. See you later.